My name is Darlin. It sounds strange for a man, I know. My mother wanted a girl, but she got me. A quiet boy with a steady gaze and hands that quickly learned to hold a shovel, and later a steering wheel, a rifle, and a hammer. I am 78, and I still remember my mother's look of disappointment when she heard my name from the nurse. Darlene? Not Dale. Not Dan. Darlene? I live in an old house on the outskirts of Greenwood, a town where everyone knows each other, but no one has listened to anyone else for a long time. My house is wooden, with peeling paint and a creaky porch that seems to echo the pain in my knees. I have lived here most of my life. This is where I buried my Mary. And this is where I wait for someone in my family to remember that I'm still alive. What was once just a shadow of indifference gradually turned into a wall that I banged my head against, day after day, year after year. It all started with little things. Michael came over one day to consult me about selling my truck. An old 1972 Ford, the one I painted myself, the one I used to carry my first loads. "Dad, it's dangerous now. No one will use it. Let's sell it and use the money to repair the roof." I said, "No." And for the first time, I saw irritation in his eyes, not that of a son, but of a stranger. He didn't argue. He just didn't ask any more. A week later, the truck was gone. No explanation. Jen had her ways too. She arranged for a home helper. For me, a girl in her 20s who came once a week, dusted, rearranged things, and asked if I wanted to move into a retirement home. Her name was Amy. She was friendly, but she talked to me like I was a baby. "Would you like some water, Darlene? Have you fallen today?" I endured 3 visits, then asked her not to come anymore. Jen was offended. She said I didn't appreciate her concern. One day, Logan, my oldest grandson, came with his father. They were sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee, and I went over to tell them about the leaky pipe. Michael waved his hand. "Dad, we'll take care of it. Go rest." Logan added, without even looking up from his phone. He doesn't even know how things work these days. Outdated views. I went out into the garden and stood there for a long time, looking at the wilted rose that Mary had planted before Jen was born. The wind swayed its head, and it seemed to me that it was bowing not to the sun, but out of shame. At the hospital, they listened to me like a machine. My heart is racing, my blood pressure is skyrocketing, and the doctor, a young guy with a trendy hairstyle, just stares at the monitor. "Your readings are within the normal range for your age. This is to be expected. Don't dramatize it." I tried to explain that the pain wasn't in the numbers, that I couldn't sleep at night because of the throbbing horror in my chest. But he looked at me like I was an old hysterical man. "We'll prescribe you something to calm you down. Get some rest." At the grocery store, I became just a body. The woman in front of me dropped a jar. I bent down to pick it up and felt my back ache. It was so bad that my vision darkened. She took the jar from my hands and didn't even say thank you. Meanwhile, the cashier started ringing up the next customer, even though I hadn't had time to get my wallet out yet. "Please don't hold up the line." I paid silently. I left. And there, on the sidewalk, for the first time in my life, I felt something new. Not sadness. Not disappointment. But a dull, burning anger. Anger at children. At people. At myself, for allowing myself to be reduced to a shadow. It was like a series of small cuts, one after another, each one not fatal, but together they drained the blood of respect from me. I was empty, or almost, because somewhere inside, something was still smoldering. And I knew this fire would either go out completely or burn everything around it. I just hadn't decided what yet. I have 2 children, Michael and Jen. They are both successful. He is an accountant, she is a lawyer. They visit occasionally, mostly when they need something. To sign documents, to look after the house, because you're not doing anything anyway, Dad. My grandchildren are Logan, Cindy, and Ben. They used to run up to me with hugs, asking me to tell them stories about the army, about how I met their grandmother. Now they stare at their phones, and when they do talk, it's only to ask if I have Wi-Fi. The phone is silent for days. When it does ring, it's either spam or Jen asking me to check if her old dress is still in the closet. At Christmas, I receive printed cards with no signature. Once, I went to visit them in the city myself. I waited 3 hours on a bench near their office, and then I received a message. Dad, we don't have time, sorry. They don't recognize me at the corner store anymore. I used to go in, and the saleswoman Laura would smile and ask how I was doing. Now she just rings up my purchases without looking me in the eye. Once I said, "Good morning," and she replied, without even looking up, "Would you like a bag?" I notice how young people avert their gaze when I walk down the street. How drivers honk impatiently when I don't cross the road as quickly as they would like. How my neighbors no longer greet me, as if I were no longer alive. And worst of all, I'm starting to believe they're right. Sleep is my only ally. In my dreams, I am still strong. I am still Darlene, keeping my word and holding my gun. But every morning I wake up in a rocking chair, with an old blanket over my legs, and with a silence that weighs heavier than any prison. And I hear, whispering. Not from outside, from inside. It started recently. It's as if something deep inside me is saying, "You're still here. You can still do it." I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me, or my memories pushing me forward. But I feel that something is going to change. Soon. And not for someone else, for me. I remember the smell of oil on my hands at 17. I was working in Uncle Sam's auto repair shop at the time. That mechanic was an old grump, but he taught me the first rule of life. If you don't know what to do, clean your tools. While you're cleaning, you'll figure it out. And that's how I lived. I kept everything in order, even when the world was falling apart. At 20, I volunteered for the army. I served in Vietnam and saw my friends die under palm leaves. I wasn't a hero. I just did what I had to do. I came back a different person. More silent, less naive. Mary said then that my eyes had become deeper. I didn't understand what she meant, but I believed her. Mary. She was the light. A nurse who knew how to heal not only wounds, but also the heart. We got married 6 months after we met. We bought this house, where I still live. I laid the foundation myself and built the walls myself. I remember how Mary held the lantern while I was installing the roof, and sang so that I wouldn't fall asleep from exhaustion. After the army, I started from scratch. I founded a small transportation company. I drove the first truck myself and hired the first employees myself. At 40, I had 3 drivers, a small office, and an honest name. I didn't become a millionaire, but everyone in town knew that Darlene was a man of his word. I paid on time, helped my employees, and didn't take their last penny. When Mary died, my world was turned upside down again. I was left with my children, who were still teenagers at the time. It was difficult. I cooked, cleaned, and worked nights so that they would have everything they needed. Sometimes I fell asleep in the kitchen with a spoon in my hand. But I didn't give up. Because I was a father. And I couldn't afford to be weak. During those years, I taught my children the most important things. Always look people in the eye when you speak. Always pay your debts. And never betray yourself. On Sundays, we all went to church. Afterwards, I would fry pancakes in the backyard, and the neighbors would gather to listen to me play the harmonica. The children laughed and ran barefoot on the grass. Life was hard, but it was real. I was proud. I was somebody. And here I am, in the same house. With the same hands, only older. And the world seems to have forgotten all of this. Forgotten me. But I haven't forgotten. And I haven't forgiven. It happened on Tuesday. The day was gloomy and sticky. I went to the pharmacy to buy some painkillers for my knee. I walked slowly, holding onto a cane I had made myself from a solid oak tree. The sidewalk was uneven and wet. I tripped on the curb and fell, not badly, but awkwardly. My fingers were scraped, and the cane rolled away. A young woman in a business suit was walking by. She had headphones in her ears and coffee in her hands. I looked up at her. "Miss, please help me," I croaked. She stopped, looked down at me as if I were something strange, and said, "It's your own fault if you can't walk. I'm in a hurry." And she walked away. A man in a t-shirt with a bag was standing nearby. He looked and turned away. No one helped. No one bent down. I lay among the cobblestones like old junk that no one wants to take away. And then something inside me snapped. It wasn't tears. It wasn't pain. It was an explosion. I got up on my knees, then on my feet. My fingers were burning, but I picked up the stick, wiped the blood on my jacket, and slowly walked to the pharmacy. The woman behind the counter looked at me in horror. "Are you okay, sir?" I smiled. For the first time in a long time. Because it was a wolf's smile. She sensed it and took a step back. That evening, I returned home and took an old box out of the attic. It contained army photos, letters from Mary, a notebook with notes. And there was the same knife I once carried on duty, not as a weapon, but as a memento. I didn't want blood. But I remembered who I was. I wasn't a shadow. The next day, I visited Michael. Without warning, he opened the door, surprised. I didn't wait for an invitation. I just walked in. "Sit down, Dad. Did something happen?" I looked at him for a long time. And then I said, "You think I'm old junk. You all think that. But I remember how you cried when you got beaten up at school, and I stood guard under your window at night so you could sleep peacefully. I remember when Jen ran away from home, and I found her in another city. I wasn't weak then, and I'm not weak now." He had no choice but to remain silent, because he knew I was right. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "They've forgotten who I am, but I'll remind them. Not loudly, not bloodily, but so that they'll remember." It wasn't anger. It was justice, as old as the world itself. And I began to plan. Not revenge. A return. Because old age is not the end. It's a stage. And some stages begin with an explosion. And this explosion was already rumbling in my soul. I started small. I pulled my military diary out of an old chest and turned it into a journal, not for revenge, but as a reminder. I called it simply, The Return. Each page contains thoughts, plans, and fragments of memories that I will not allow to be erased. I called an old friend from the army, Jeremy. We hadn't seen each other in 20 years. "Darlene? You're alive, you son of a bitch." His voice was like a sip of whiskey, strong, bitter, real. We talked for 3 hours. We reminisced about the war, women, dreams. He said one thing to me that sparked something. "You're still hanging in there, brother. That means you can still strike." I wasn't going to strike literally, but I wanted the world to remember that old age is not helplessness. It is experience, wisdom, and, if necessary, a weapon. I started with my family. I sent a letter to Michael and Jen where I didn't ask for anything, didn't complain. I just told them who I was. I added a copy of the old contract, which showed that I had refused to sell the house for a lot of money, so that they would have a place to grow up. I added photos of their first days at school, where I stand next to them, tired but happy. And at the bottom I wrote, "This is me, and I'm still here." Then I turned to the City Museum. I offered to create an exhibition about small entrepreneurs of the 60s and 70s. I brought photos of my truck, old invoices, even uniforms with the company logo. At first, they turned me down. But I knew how to talk. I knew how to sell. A week later, I got a call. "Mr. Darlin, we are impressed. We want to organize an exhibition about you and your business." I smiled. It was my first victory. I decided to teach my grandchildren. Not punish them, but teach them. I invited them to a secret evening. I told them I would show them something they had never seen before. They came reluctantly, but curiosity got the better of them. I took them out into the garden and unfolded an old map marked with the places where I had fought. I told them how we survived in the jungle, how we lost friends, how we found faith. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lecture them. I just told them the truth. They listened. Then I gave them my old pocket knives. "These are not weapons. They are tools. But the main thing is how you use them. And why." Something changed in Ben's eyes. Tears glistened in Cindy's. And Logan. He stayed behind after everyone else and said, "Grandpa, you could write a book. It's important. People need to know." And so I started writing. Not a novel. Not a memoir. A chronicle. The truth. About how hard it is to live when you're ignored. And how important it is not to give up. With each page, I felt something lost returning. Self-respect. The memory of who I am. Not because of heroism, but because of the truth. And the silence that was no longer emptiness, but space for new thoughts. Darlene came back. Not loudly, but forever. I'm not looking for pity. I've never looked for it. What I wanted was respect. Not as an old man, not as a veteran, or a dad, but as a person. A person who lived an honest, hard life, but with love. And now I know, respect doesn't come by itself. It has to be demanded, and sometimes pulled out of oblivion. My children have started calling more often. But the main thing is that they listen. Not out of politeness. And really, Jen recently asked me to give a lecture at her son's school about war and dignity. Michael gave me a new notebook with the words, "Your story must be heard." The grandchildren come in unannounced, like they used to. They bring old photos, ask to explain who is in them. And when I speak, they write them down. Not in their phones. In their notebooks. They want to remember. I realized I didn't take revenge. I stood up for myself. My story. What society wants to throw away along with the wrinkles. I write in my diary every day. It has become a book. A book about how dignity does not depend on age. That memory is a weapon. And love is a duty, not a mercy. I go out on the porch every evening, like I used to. Only now I am not alone. Logan is nearby, Cindy is nearby, Jeremy is calling from Texas. We laugh. And I know, I am no longer a shadow. Old age is not a sentence. It is a truth that you can either live with or fade away. I chose to live. And if any of the younger ones read these lines, remember, respect those who came to you from the past. They are not fragments. They are the foundation. And if you, like me, feel like the world has passed you by, listen carefully. If you've been written off, they're afraid. They're afraid of the power you still have. Stand up. Speak up. And don't be silent until you're heard. Darlene James Coleman, 78. A person, not a shadow.